Yeah, like so many like African American families, like both sides of my family came up here in Flint during the Great Migration to find new opportunities for themselves and for their families. And both my parents came up here like as kids, and I am Muslim. I always love saying that I'm Muslim, and both of my parents converted to Islam basically when they were teenagers. There was like an age difference, and then, like they met each other, got married, and started a family right here in Flint. And my dad worked for General Motors, like so many other Flint families. I was able to raise a family here, and my mom, like, eventually, like, worked for the local hospital. Like, it was St. Joe's at the time, and then it transitioned to Genesis, and then to find more opportunity, my parents moved to Grand Blanc, and I grew up in Grand Blanc for about half of my life, and stayed there until after college. And I really wanted, and the crazy part is um, like I came back to Flint not because I was like, ooh, Flint. It was mainly because I'm not a morning person and I found the job. And I wanted to move as close to the job as possible because I didn't want to oversleep like I did with so many like of my morning college classes. And so like I just moved back to Flint, but I really love Flint because I grew up in the suburbs, and like suburbs like don't have sidewalks, like they don't really want you outside, and I really miss like just kind of like the interaction of just being in community. Like it never really felt like a community. I mean, I think that that probably is changing like for suburbs now, but like at the time, like in the 90s and 2000s, it was mainly like a bedroom community. Basically, all you did was sleep there and you drove, everywhere else because like you just had to have a car. It was like it wasn't even a place where you could really walk because there wasn't even sidewalks, so it wasn't even designed for you to walk. Like they want you to hop in your car, get out your garage, and just drive to where you needed to go.
I know, I was never one for that kind of life either. Um, Let me ask you, so your parents stayed? They didn't come back to Flint with you?
No, like my parents eventually like, they got divorced and like moved to different states and, all of that. Please don't put that in there, okay?
Just relevant to the story.
Okay, yeah. So um and so like, like I got a job, and it was a good paying job, and then I was starting to feel really dissatisfied because I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna do this for my whole life because both my parents like they basically had that job until they retired, and I was like, I don't know if I could do this until I retire because this is not like really fulfilling. Like I did it because I was good at it, and I did it because it was a job, but I was feeling like something was missing, and so that's when I started like volunteering.
Let me stop you right there. I like where this is going, that you were doing a job because you were good at it, but it wasn't fulfilling, but you keep saying it. Is that your engineering job?
Yes,
So,
yes, yes.
because that's interesting. Most people would think, wow, engineering, that's amazing. But you turned your back on that to do something more fulfilling. So I think that's really interesting. If you could name it.
Well, I mean, for me, like, like I'm Muslim, as I said before, and one of the pillars of Islam, one of them is zakat, which is charity. And like it is, like if you're Muslim, you're supposed to be giving back, like, and how I eventually decided to move in my deen was to um to give back through volunteering like in the community. And I started like volunteering at a community center not too far from where I lived. And I had a friend who was a college friend and was putting together an after school program for young girls because there was something for boys, but the girls were just like watching the boys play basketball. And so, wanted something for, the young ladies to do. And me and a couple of other people, we just randomly put together like a whole program and got like 200 kids. And it was awesome and amazing. And we tutored the boys and the girls, but talking about self-esteem and puberty and like all of those things as like girls become young women, and that was something that was super exciting for me. And we took them on trips, like probably wasn't the best because like when you're like 23, you're not thinking about, oh, we need to get permission slips or liability or all the things that I think of now as a executive director of a nonprofit. But, at the time it was just like, hey, let's take these kids to Shed Aquarium. Like, yeah, that sounds great. All right, we're going to kick in some money to get a bus. And that's what we did. So
This is all before you moved back to Flint.
this is actually when I first moved back to Flint. And so, eventually, um,
Can you talk, before we move on in the story, can you talk about the feelings you had that turned you away from the engineering world to do stuff that was more important to you?
well, like for me, I just think like I had a whole kind of crisis of who I was, identity crisis, because also like, like I ended up getting married, ended up getting divorced, and was just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do anything. Like, I don't know what I want to do. And so I decided that maybe I should hide in school. Like I don't know what I'm gonna do, and then also just like the sexism and ageism that I encountered like in my career, like was it didn't really feel welcoming. I mean, really, it never really felt welcoming. Like even when I was in college, like I remember having like a teacher say that he didn't think that women should be in the engineering field, and so that really, it just really didn't feel like it was very welcoming for me. And I just thought like maybe it's just this one job, and so I like swapped to another job. I was like, well, maybe it's just this, and I was just like, maybe it's just this culture at this one company or this one firm. And then it just kind of felt like it was everywhere. And I was like I was just trying to figure it out. And eventually, like as I went back to school, decided that I didn't want to be in that field anymore. But I had no plan. It was just like, I got some money, like I'll figure it out. My parents were like, this isn't how we paid for your college education for you to just sit back and you know, not doing anything. So my mom convinced me to volunteer because she just thought it was a phase and just thought that um like eventually I'm gonna go back to work, but I needed to have something on my resume to say I just wasn't sitting at home like watching Cartoon Network. so um, so I started actually like figuring out like, well, where would I want to volunteer at? And so I decided to volunteer at Planned Parenthood because I used their services when I was in college, and became like a rock star volunteer because I was like, hey, I like going out talking to people, and they were doing like the bar crawls, and I'm like, I like talking to people. Like I'm just talking to the people I already know, so this is great, So so I just started doing that, and eventually I got hired, like working at Planned Parenthood, and that kind of launched, I would say, like my second career as a community organizer, and doing like a bunch of different things. But always I was ensuring um, that I wanted to like utilize my skills like for the betterment of the people of Flint, because like as a community organizer, this is like pre 2008, so before Barack Obama, people really didn't know what a community organizer was. um So it's like, yeah, like it's basically like how do we build power, like in the community, and how do we make sure that residents are stepping to the power that they already own, and to teach them not to concede their power.
Let me ask you this. In 2008, you're a community organizer and you're looking around, asking yourself these questions. What did you see when you looked around that needed help?
I mean, I've done so many things that I think a lot of people probably don't really know. Because for me, it was always about the issues. Like, it's never about, like, if you're friends with, an elected official or a decision maker. It's always about the issue. So, I mean, I can't even, like, I don't even know. Like, there was, like, a different mayor, Don Williamson, like he passed like this. He wanted to make sagging pants like a misdemeanor, and I'm like, that's targeting, like young black people. So, authorizing the police to like pull over people with saggy pants and like, write them a ticket. And so I was like, screw that. Like, we're not doing that here. Like, you're not gonna like legislate something that may be like that is somewhat like could be like a fashion statement. It's like you can't really do that. Like, that's just totally wrong. And um and so I start organizing like around that, and just a bunch of different things. Like, I can't even really think about all the things, but just making sure that people who are starting like community groups and black clubs, that they had the skills that they needed to be successful. Um, Doing kind of like local electoral work and other type of issue things. Like, I worked on passing like a human rights ordinance here in Flint, and I can't even think about like all of the things. Like, I've never really written it down. It was just like, this is something that's needed and necessary, and just stepping in to ensure that things got done.
In general, just to make it a concise thing, that would be good to say, if this is correct, was it in general you were helping people find a voice, or in
I don't really like saying like help people find a voice, because their voice is already there. Like, they always had a voice. And it's just like making sure that they have the skills, that they feel comfortable, like using the voice that they already have. Because it's not like I feel like, these decision makers are just sitting on these ivory towers and you're just here as a petitioner, like, please listen to me. Like, that's not how I see that power is. I just feel like power is like, really, people think that it's like this stable triangle, like you have the two flat sides, and then this is the top, and then this is the power, these people decision makers, and the people are down here. And I'm like, it's really like this, and it's like really unstable, you know and it's just like institutions that are trying to prop it up, but it's really unstable, and it's just like, it can topple with, like with anything. And you know I felt like with the implementation of the emergency manager law in 2011, like people started to really see like how just like the lengths that that people will go through to try to maintain the power, try to maintain that, because by the time like 2011, I probably know you want to talk more about the water crisis and all that stuff.
no,
Oh, you don't? Okay,
no,
cool.
I absolutely do, but I'm not.
Oh,
I'd like to hear what you have
yeah,
to say.
but because like actually like now I'm thinking about it, like I started really doing like kind of like with a lot of people, like I've always voted, Um, and my parents like always instilled the importance of me voting. And when I was in college, like I would just say like my community service was like registering people to vote. And I was doing that like for like a long time and had volunteered to do that basically like every year and before like every election cycle. And and you know, and I wasn't even thinking about this now, but I was just thinking about like kind of like one of the first things that I did. It was as an adult, because I did a couple of things like when I was under 18. But I would say like one of the first things I did as an adult when I moved back to Flint. Flint had like I would say like uh, I've been back in Flint for about 20 years. And about like that same length of time, there's always been, schools, elementary schools, like on the chopping block for being closed. And the neighborhood that I lived in when I first moved back to Flint, like had a bunch of like, like retired teachers and stuff. So there was an elementary school, Freeman Elementary School, that was like on the bubble for being like it was big, tossed up as being one of the elementary schools that was going to close. And I remember going door to door and talking to people. And this is like before I was trained as a community organizer, but like even if you don't go through that formal training, you know that you win when it's when it's many people. Like you don't necessarily win when you're just all alone. And and it just like really like with just like several things in our history, just the power of people coming together. Like people coming together can like change the world. And it's never like unfortunately like with the media and how they wish to like revise or reframe, different stories. Like they want to create like a savior, a hero, coming in riding a horse. Probably like from Hollywood and like all the westerns and stuff. But just like coming in and like is with this one person, like this is like what the thing is. Like and they always like wanna like create that big. And I think for I think because they want to discourage people like, oh, it has to be this one person, you have to have these magical skills. But it's like, no, like every social movement, like it's always been a group of people. Like the civil rights movement wasn't just like Martin Luther King and the March on Washington. It was like hundreds of people. And unfortunately, we don't know all of their names, but they got the work done. Like it wasn't just like Martin Luther King saying, I want to have a march and everybody's like, ooh, Martin Luther King, like that's not how it was. And I think that we have to constantly like retell like those stories that yes, it was people. It wasn't just this one person that came in and just saved folks. Like people were saving themselves and putting their bodies on the line like long before, Martin Luther King was a twinkle in his parents' eye. And I think that is specifically like around the Flint water crisis. It's just like, they want to say like, oh, it's just this one person or these two
Do they?
people. The media, the media does. Um, I know like people in Flint aren't just like it was just this one person, but like, like, but then like when you think about like how history is preserved, well, how history is created, and like one of the things that people, like when you think about like for like the different types of sources that they use as a foundation to create like the history books, they go to newspaper articles, or like documentaries or like whatever that is. And and that can be dangerous because like what because then that becomes the story that's kind of preserved. And unfortunately, because we have this, um, like, there's so much information out there, but like, how do you discern that information and what gets repeated? You know?
Well, let me ask you, um, talking about the water crisis, like, when did you become aware that something was happening here and that you wanted to um, get involved?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't talk about the Flint water crisis without seeding it within the public policy of the emergency manager law that the state of Michigan passed in March of 2011. So, Governor Snyder, who was elected in 2010, November 2010, in his first 6 months, he had like basically this whole suite of bills that like really like attacked working families. Like they were like super regressive. And the emergency manager law was just one of many of the like one of many. Like that became the most egregious of it because like there was a bill that like I personally I was fighting against, which was ending Michigan's earned income tax credit. So that's basically like Michigan's version of the federal government's earned income tax credit. And he like eliminated that. Then there was like taxing pensions um, and it was just like ending like lifetime assistance, public assistance, cash assistance. So like I was actually fighting against those things, and then it was like, oh, there's this other thing called like the emergency manager law, and we were just like, oh, we were like, that's not gonna pass, like that's like crazy, and but that wasn't even my priority like at the time, and they passed those, they basically passed all those bills, and just immediately after, like they enshrined, because there were three communities in the state of Michigan that were under receivership at the time. It was the Detroit Public Schools, the city of Pontiac, and the city of Benton Harbor. So talking about um, the emergency manager law, it was like one of many of these state receivership laws. So there's like I think 37 across the country, but Michigan's was the one that was the most extreme. And so what the emergency manager law does, and it's still on the books, it takes two like your local municipality or school district takes the legislative and executive branch. So for a municipality, that's like your city council, city commissioner, or and mayor, and it replaces them with a single appointee by the state, and they have the power to hire and fire employees, enter into bank file applications for bankruptcy, sell off public assets, and renegotiate contracts. And and it was like one of these things that was really to kind of like save the state because like after this was like after the Great Recession, and the automobile industry like got bailed out by the federal government, and because of just like how the state of Michigan is set up, like this like really took a hit, and there were like a lot of communities that were like teetering to like losing it all, and the state of Michigan wanted to maintain their own borrowing power with the bond ratings because like I mean a bond rating is similar to like an individual's credit score, so it tells you like how much you're able to borrow, you know like if you could sell municipal bonds, like what would be what would be the rate, the interest rate, and all this stuff. And then also because the state of Michigan has this weird thing called revenue sharing, which it takes like we don't have local taxes in Michigan. We just have a flat sales tax. And so what the state does, they take all that money and then like gives it back to communities, and it's called revenue sharing. But the state like took all that money, to kind of bail themselves out. And so they didn't like necessarily give that money back to like local municipalities. And so like this was like really to like, because the state like had this thing, and like they basically punished these communities because they're just like, well, we were able to do this and you're not able to do this. And it was like super subjective, like of like the implementation. Like at one point in time, 75% of the local African American elected officials had their powers taken away. They were usurped by this emergency manager. And 51% of the African Americans living in Michigan lived in a community or a school district that had like their, what we've called like democracy taken away, because we felt like this was something that could open the door to fascism. Because if you don't have, if you don't, if you if and I would say like this could be like one of these kind of experiments of like taking away people's voting rights, because you're able to elect local officials, but we live in a representative democracy and they're supposed to represent your interests, and they're unable to represent your interests because they can't vote on anything because the emergency manager has taken away all of their power. And the emergency manager, when they come into a school district or city, um, they can decide like how much you're gonna get paid, if you're gonna get paid, what are powers you're gonna have moving forward. And in 2011, December 2011, Flint received an emergency manager, and so that's when we knew that, one, we had people who were collecting signatures to put a referendum on the ballot to repeal that law, because we're like, this is crazy, this is totally insane. And just seeing like other cities, like it was just like gangbusters, like in those cities, of just like all the craziness and shenanigans they were doing. And in December, like we received the emergency manager. Actually, the governor announced that we were getting an emergency manager when we were electing a mayor, like our election day. The governor said, Flint's getting an emergency manager. And that's kind of like voter suppression, because why would people vote? They feel like their vote doesn't count. Because like when you think about like, does your vote count? Does the person because when I think of like my vote count, it's not just, am I able to go to the polling booth and get a ballot and then cast a vote? It's also, are the people that are able to elect fully able to like actualize their own power? And under the emergency manager law in Michigan, like they were not. Oh.
Is this law still on the books?
It is still on the books.
You still have an emergency manager?
We don't have an emergency manager, but the state of Michigan still has the emergency manager law. And we went through this whole phase of getting that law on the ballot. It took a lot to get it on the ballot. It had to go to the state Supreme Court to get the referendum on the ballot. November 2012, the state of Michigan voted the law down. Within 45 days, the state legislature and Governor Snyder signed a replacement law that was virtually identical to the first one, with the added caveat of a $30,000 appropriation. So in the state of Michigan, if there is an appropriation, if there's dollars attached to a bill, you can't go through the referendum process. And so and for me, like the lesson that I learned from that whole battle is that people would change the whole law to maintain like their power, to get what they want. And that was the background of like the Flint water crisis, because the replacement law was enacted in 2013. And in 2013 is when the emergency manager really kind of made this decision to move away from the Detroit Water and Sewer Department. And that decision really like that also put the city of Detroit like on this pathway to bankruptcy, because that was used, the fact that city of Flint, which was the Detroit Water and Sewer Department like largest customer, like ended that contract. It destabilized their cash flow. And the emergency manager, there was an emergency manager in Detroit, they used this act like as justification for the city of Detroit to go into bankruptcy. So
Wasn't there opposition to that?
I mean, there was, but like when you don't have any power, like the only thing that we could do as residents, because our city council didn't have any power. The emergency manager decided what time they had the meetings. The only thing the city council could do was call a meeting to order. They could listen to public comment, and then they had to adjourn the meeting. And that was it. So the emergency manager decided what would be on the agenda. Because normally, like, if you have a fully functioning democracy, like your legislative body has the autonomy to create like an agenda. Like under like the emergency manager law, city council couldn't pass a resolution, which a resolution is basically like, like it could be like, it's basically like, like this letter of support, like we're supporting this, we're condoning this. Like they couldn't pass a resolution saying the sun was going to shine tomorrow. Like they had to ask for permission to the emergency manager to get that on their agenda. And that was kind of the atmosphere that we were living under. And I mean, and it was always like legally contested since the beginning, but courts move slow. And and so like and I would say that also that was like one of the major reasons of like when the emergency manager like made that decision and switched to the Flint River, because that was not an action of the of the Flint City Council. Like immediately after, like people were like, this water is not good. And they were going down to their city council. They were going out to city council meetings and showing that water. But the city council didn't have any power. They're just like, yeah, like everything had, all roads led to the emergency manager.
So immediately, when the water was switched to the Flint River, people turned on their faucets and saw.
A lot of people did, and I would just say because of just all of the things that was happening, like at the time, like some people, their water never became discolored just because of just of the chemistry of like the pipes and what they had going on. My water did turn discolored, but it wasn't discolored all the time. It wasn't like a constant, like it's here, it's the same color for months. It wasn't like that. It was sometimes like my water, I would say, was looking like chicken broth. Sometimes it smelled like an open sewer. Sometimes it smelled like rotten eggs. And like just basically immediately, like I did a point of use filter. I was like, oh no, this is gross, you know. And
What is a point of use filter?
so a point of use filter is like one of those pure or Brita things that you put on the faucet. So there's like a faucet filter, or there's like these pitcher filters, and that's like a way for, like filtration and all that stuff.
And that was completely.
I mean, I just did that because like, like I've used them before, like when I didn't live in Flint, like we had well water. So like I was kind of, that was something I was kind of used to, but like, I mean, I didn't use it for like a while. Then I was like, okay, I guess this is, like you kind of go with what you know, and you think that this is helping you. And it did help some, but there are some things, like through, I would just say like community learning and learning on your own, that you realize the limitations of like some of those interventions, like a point of use filter. Um,
That's a
so,
great way to put it.
so, So so there was like really like, during that time there was really like three things that was going on, because there was like a water quality issue, which was like the discoloration, like people like drinking their water and they're like it tastes like metal, like it's rusty, whatever. There was an affordability issue, so the emergency manager had like raised the water rates to like as high as it was ever, like before. And in the state of Michigan, if you have a if you don't have potable water for 72 hours, like Child Protective Services can come and remove your children from the home. And what the city of Flint was doing was the city workers, when they would turn off water to people's homes because it was super high and people couldn't afford it, if they saw evidence of children in the home, they would report them to Child Protective Services. And then there was, which kind of leads to the third issue, what was happening is people, partaking in, I would say, survival crimes because they don't want their children to be removed. So they're paying for somebody to turn the water back on. And so the emergency manager, Darnell Early, hired retired police officers to, build cases to prosecute folks who were turning on water on their own. So like all three of those things was happening, at the same time
No, that's
in 2014,
it's kind of hard to believe.
2013.
It's like thugs are in control. But the thing about turning water off, people were having the water turned off because
Affordability.
the water bills were so high, right?
Hmm.
But how about if you're renting? If you're renting, you don't have water bills, do you?
It depends. So, some people, because one of the things that the emergency manager did was like they, when I say like raising like the water bills, so so they increase like the fees and just like all of these things to get water on. So, like I think at one point in time it was like, like there was like if you're a renter in Flint, and there's about half of the population in Flint like is living in non homeowner occupied housing. They would have to go down to the city and pay a deposit, and the emergency manager like increased the price of that deposit. So what you would have, for people who had rental properties is they may or may not have had it in their name, like the water bill in their name, or renters when they would rent a home, the homeowner would just say like, "Hey, I do have the water bill in my name," but they're not paying the water bill, So it's just putting people like in this precarious situation, or people who are selling their homes, because also in Michigan and in the city of Flint, like it follows the property and not the person. So it was people, I know a couple of people who bought their home and then found out like later on when they were trying to turn on their water that like there was already like, $1,000 owed, like on their water bill. And then I would just say like there was this other thing that was also kind of happening is that there was no way for people to dispute their water bill. So like we would see and I remember like through the organizing, because like we were against, because I'm the director of Flint Rising, but during the time of the water crisis, Flint Rising wasn't in existence. That came like really during the aftermath of all of the emergency declarations around like the lead and water crisis. So, but I was part of this grassroots group. Well, I guess I am part of this grassroots group that's called the Flint Democracy Defense League, and they really formed like, like after the city of Flint received an emergency manager. So we were doing like these organizing meetings around those three issues of just like the water quality, the water affordability, and people being prosecuted for turning on water on their own. And we would just hear like these horror stories of just like people who are like, yeah, my water bill was like, $180, and then the next month it's $800, and there's like no leaks and all of that stuff. But there was like really no process for people to dispute their water bills, because the I would say kind of like the informal process that we had before, the emergency manager eliminated that body through an executive order. So there was this thing called like the Human Relations Commission, which mostly dealt with fair housing, but also people, kind of like worked on water bills too. It was like a group of, residents, but there was like really like no formal way to dispute a water bill. So it was kind of like you either pay, and you think, or people refuse to pay because they're like, that's not my bill. That's not what I'm using. I have no leaks. I've paid hundreds of dollars getting plumbers out here checking every little thing. And, and part of it was like the city had these water meters that were failing, and and then they're just going wackadoodle. The meters are going wackadoodle, but people couldn't, but there was like really no formal way to dispute, the bills.
Why was anybody creating such a catastrophic situation? Who was making money? Who was it benefiting to do this with the water bill and not people not being able to?
Well, I think that you have this thing of, like, I think that at one point, I would say there's two different answers. So at one point, like, it's austerity. So these all these decisions are like really based in like austerity. So creating like, I mean, the emergency manager law is based on austerity. And like when your only framework and purpose is like, I need to resolve this financial debt, because the city of Flint went into receivership for like, I think like $15 million that they said that they were in debt. um, but they were unable to get any sort of loan from the state or anything. So the emergency manager's like, I'm gonna raise these fees. I'm selling off Santa. Like, oh yeah, so the emergency manager like sold off, like we had a Santa Claus, and he put it up for auction, and we organized and bought it back. So, which there's a whole story about the Santa. It was like Flint saved Santa. But yeah, like, and selling off like, like the discarded marble from City Hall for like $6 a slab at the auction. Because they're like, we gotta make up this debt. Like selling off Santa is going to like get rid of a $15 million debt. But then the other thing is like like when the city of Flint like got out of the Detroit Water and Sewer Department, they the emergency like there was this other duplicate pipeline called the Kagani Water Authority, and the city of Flint, who was already in debt, was able to take out $100 million in municipal bonds to help pay for this pipeline. So it's the city of Flint and Genesee County are on the hook, to pay for a pipeline which is bringing untreated water here. So, and the city of Flint, like they needed the city of Flint because it was the largest like single customer, like with the population, to secure that funding to build the pipeline. So
what kind of things did you guys identify to try to achieve to fix this issue and get clean water to the people?
yeah, I mean, like we did a whole bunch of different things. Like we did marches and demonstrations, like tons of community meetings. Like basically during the time where we were under receivership, like it was a core group of people who went down to city council because it was televised on public access, to basically talk about this, like to constantly beat the drum of, yes, we're under a dictatorship. This is not like the democracy that that you're used to, and this is basically a sham. And so we need you to rise up with us and confront this. So, I mean, like, so we did that, like, you know, writing letters to the editor, like doing like all of the things, But I remember like after, like in December of 2015, uh like there was a Safe Drinking Water Act violation, and there was like a bunch of different things that was happening too, like during 2014, and well, it was all during 2014 now I'm thinking about it. So like within like 6 months, like there were like all of these like E. coli outbreaks, and the discoloration, and then finally in General Motors saying like, yes, this is rusting our parts, and the city of Flint under the emergency manager is like, okay, we don't care that you're the largest single customer. We're gonna like release you from this contract, and we're gonna build you a little spur so you can have clean water, so your parts aren't rusting. And I remember like we confronted.
So they help General Motors, but not the people.
Yes. So we confronted the emergency manager, like at a meeting, and we were like, yeah, so what's happening in our bodies says, like, this water is rusting the pipes to General Motors. And the emergency manager said, that's apples and oranges. Like, that's what he said. So like what a lot of.
That's really important. If you could just say that again, with ending with the apples and oranges is fantastic, but to make it clear that it was like the choice was made to help the corporation and not the citizens of Flint.
Yeah. I mean, so in October 2014, like there was like this article that said that, like the General Motors their parts are rusting, and the response for the emergency manager was, you don't have to pay for Flint water. We're going to build you like a city that is supposed to be in financial debt, and that's the reason why we have an emergency manager, is going to pay to build like a clean source of water for a multi-billion-dollar company. And we just felt like that was like absolutely outrageous. And through just like our own social network, we found out that the emergency manager was going to be speaking at University of Michigan Flint, like for this panel. And we decided that we were going to, like, as organizers, we decided that we were going to go there and confront him. And, like we came up with a list of questions, and we asked people to, like, we wrote them out and typed them up, and like handed slips to ask people if they wanted to like read a question, and we asked, like, during that panel, we asked emergency manager at that time, that was Darnell Early, why we was able to release General Motors, but we're still drinking this water. And the emergency manager said, that's apples and oranges. So we were like, well, what's happening to our bodies? Like, and it was just like, it just became perfectly clear, like, that we were like less important than this multi-billion-dollar corporation. And then the other thing that was like absolutely insulting was that like they were able to get a clean source of water, but people in Flint were prohibited to getting any type of water, like outside of like they in Flint, like you can't build a well. So you can't be like, all right, I'm not doing this municipal water, this is garbage. I'm gonna build a well. Like, you can't build a well. So what a lot of people ended up doing, because they wanted a clean source of water, is they just end up paying 2 water bills. So they were paying for bottled water, and then paying for the water that basically, like just basically to flush the toilet, because some people weren't even using the water to shower. And
I can't even fathom the amount of money it takes to have enough bottled water in the house for a family to shower, brush their teeth.
it's a lot.
Cook, drink,
It's a lot. It's a lot. I mean, like I was paying like $100 a week. You know.
If you could finish that thought, I was paying $100 a week for bottled water, right?
Yeah, I was paying $100 a week for bottled water, and part of it, and then you're kind of making like one of the things like during the water crisis and then afterwards is like people begin to make value judgments based on the amount of water they have in their home. So you're going to avoid like water intensive foods. So, pasta that uses a lot of water, or, like dried beans because you need water to soak and water to cook. So you're just kind of making like different type of choices, or like I know like some people, like I don't do that, but people who were doing Thanksgiving and using all bottled water, like that's a lot, doing a whole meal, for your family using bottled water. So I mean it's just a whole lot, especially like on a community that like over 40% like lives below the poverty line. Like that's a lot. So it was just like really difficult because we were just like, well, we don't really know, because like one of the things that I also felt like being like super naive is just like you feel like, well, if people just actually know and they have the information, then they're going to be in alignment with the truth and make a decision based on truth. And that was like not the case at all. So I remember, so we were part of the group, well, I was part of the group that, the community group that was just like, a bunch of like this multi kind of sector group. So, like we had like, the folks who were like, we're against the emergency manager law, and that's how we kind of chimed in, and kind of rolled into like the Flint water crisis stuff. And then like we had like, like clergy who was just like, we can't even do baptisms, because this water is like, we got to do baptisms outside the city. So it's impacting like our congregation. And then you have folks who, really got activated. So people got activated at different times, So some people got activated because there was a Safe Drinking Water Act violation and for total trihalomethanes, and the city was mandated to mail a letter to every water customer. And that's like when a lot of people was just like, hold up, something's happening with our water, because everybody received a letter. Well, most people received a letter. Some people never received a letter.
And how far into the water crisis did this letter come to people?
That was about 6 months in. So the switch happened April 2014. Well, maybe I'm terrible at math. The letter actually happened during Christmas vacation of 2014. And it was just like, there was this whole uproar, and it took like almost a month for the city to like, we're going to do this meeting to talk about this. But by that time, folks, and the way that whole meeting was super insulting anyway. So one of my many jobs is like I worked as a facilitator. And you could tell by looking at the agenda of like how much public input and how much interaction like is good. Like when you build an agenda, like exactly, like what are going to be the discussion points and interaction points and all that stuff. It was like there was like nothing. And so people were, they were incensed because they were just felt super insulted. Like I call that the infamous dome meeting. So there's like, there was basically this meeting that, like basically like just disintegrated because like people were just absolutely insulted. And like like a lot of those, there's a lot of pictures around like the water crisis that like they're from that meeting. So because people were just starting to pop up, and people were just like angry.
Were there any engineers, scientists who were presenting data to say these people are drinking dangerous water? Did you guys have any experts on your side to push the case. We need new plumbing, we need pipes, we need to,
Well, I mean, like I would say with the elected officials and people from the state, like it was just all gaslighting. So like even at that meeting, people were showing like their water, and they like, and folks were like, "That's not your water." And so it's just like you must have put food coloring in your water in that water. So it was just like, and people were like, "Are you? Can you? Will you drink this water?" And they refused. There was like, "I wouldn't drink that water." It's like, well, why are you expecting us to drink the water then, if you don't want to drink the water? But I mean, like the whole thing with like Mark Edwards, that didn't happen until like the summer 2015. So we were, um, like we were, like really trying to also like like right after like that dome meeting, like we had these organizing meetings, which we were planning these meetings like way before this letter came out around the Safe Drinking Water Act. Uh, because we were planning like those meetings for like probably about 4 or 5 months before. I think we started planning them like in the like around October of just like we want to have these organizing meetings to figure out like what do people want to do, like what can we collectively do together. And basically like out of those organizing meetings, like the thing that rose to the top was we want to do a boycott. We don't want to pay these water bills. And so, for a way for folks to do this safely and not be negatively impacted, like we wanted to get an attorney to file a case, so like we could set up escrow accounts for people to pay that, because we didn't want people to be separated, their families to be separated, because like the city of Flint coming in and turning off their water and removing kids from their homes. So, but we couldn't find an attorney. Like we were trying to find an attorney that would take that on, and like we really couldn't find one. And
can I ask you what was happening to the people that were drinking the water? What did you know? What did you guys understand that was happening to kids, happening to people health-wise?
well, we didn't know that until later. It wasn't necessarily like at the time. So like basically like after there was and I always refer to this as validation of what their experience is. um so like we were part of the community, we were part of like the people on the ground that work with Mark Edwards to identify folks to get their water independently tested. And it was basically, just for people to know what's in their water. Like it wasn't like we're going to find this, that, and the other. But we worked with Kurt Guyette, who is an investigative journalist who worked for the ACLU in Michigan, and he was like hired basically to write stories around the emergency manager law and Detroit bankruptcy. But he ended up, because of the things that was happening up here, ended up becoming interested, and he helped like facilitate that. So it was some people, because I remember like Leanne Walters reaching out to me like, I don't know when, like probably like February of 2015, because she got her test results with the lead. And I remember like, because of just my other job that I had at the time, um, had connections with local journalists, and I like messaged them, and no response. I never got I'm still waiting a response around
Why do
that.
you think that was?
I
Sounds
mean,
like such a good story.
because it wasn't the story. Because like at the time, what was happening was like we would raise an issue, and then there would be a response from the media that would kind of rationalize the issue. So it would be like, our water bills are high, and it's like, oh, it's like, well, it is high. It's the highest in the county. Like really, it's the highest in the nation. So it didn't really seem like, you say like, well, it's just the highest in the county. You're assuming like there's 83 counties in Michigan. So folks are like, well, it's just the highest in this county, but there's 83 counties in Michigan. So, And there's like, thousands of counties like across the country. So folks may not necessarily think of like have like the gravity of that situation. And so like we would like raise these issues and then they would be reported on, but there wasn't like any sort of like deeper dive of just like there's something more that's happening here. Um so like we had, like every group that was involved, which was like, clergy and, like just like the other community groups, like we had committed to bringing folks to get their water tested, because it was just like, all right, we're doing 50, you're doing 100, we're getting up to 300. And so we had, did like these community meetings with the folks and like got their, like distribute the test kits, like made sure that they felt empowered to, like collect their own water samples, like they were collected.
Let me ask you something. Was this water issue concentrated in, I'm just going to be very blunt, was it concentrated more in poor areas? Or was it kind of a lot of people affected across all socioeconomic levels here?
I would say that it was
That the water,
it's presented in different ways. Like the issue, like which is the
let me
lack
stop
of
you right
treatment.
there. Just because this is going to be very important
Okay.
to hear, say the water crisis was presented in different ways. My voice won't be here. I don't know how it's going to be edited out.
Okay. Okay. Well,
But the water
no.
crisis was presented.
It was basically like the age of your home, where you lived, and how long the water took, to get to your home. So it's basically those three things for the most part. Because the other thing is like this is like a bit complicated because, like some areas like had low lead. Some areas like their water was discolored. We don't know how often the lead is because like with water chemistry, it's not constant. It's not like you turn on the hot water and it's just hot water all the time. Like that's not how lead works. Like we had different types of lead. We had particulate lead, which is small particles, like little pieces, like crumbs, and sometimes because of just the whole like how the water was not treated and the water was super acidic, like your pipes is like I'm fine, and it's like a boom, then you got lead, and then there was some places that became soluble, which means that it wasn't particulate. And so some people had high lead when they were testing, but because lead is odorless and colorless, their water was always clear. And some people like had the lead because like the other thing is like before the Flint water crisis, like the conventional wisdom was like drinking water was not a source of lead. So it's just paint, soil, and dust. And because like of just like all of these other things, our policies are just like we're just going to capture paint, soil, and dust. And so how they capture paint, soil, and dust is like they assume that people who are poor live in old homes that you're exposed to lead paint or the soil or the dust. So they require, if you're on public assistance, for the child to have their blood tested before they're the age of 2. And then that gets reported to the feds because like those are federal programs, like Medicaid and like SNAP and that stuff. And so what we were able to do was Dr. Mona Hanatisha, like the blood lead data, that's the data. Like it's data that's already collected, that's been collected, since these programs were created, basically. And so she looked at that data. And then overlaid it with the data that was generated what we were doing, which was like the people that we, like looking at the age of the house, because depending on how old your house is, like you may have like galvanized steel, or maybe full lead, or copper with lead solder welds. So like all of those things, like will determine like how much lead you will have like in your home. So like basically the older homes, you're more likely to be part of it, but also like, the other thing is like the city of Flint, the majority of the homes were built before like 1978 for lead, like for the lead paint, but like, like they didn't, like it was basically like in the 2010s, when they finally like took lead out of solder. So it's basically everybody, you know, no matter where. So I mean, it impacted everybody. It impacted, but in different ways. So like I have a friend that like lives, like in, I would say more of the wealthier part, had a miscarriage, um and
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
okay.
I'm trying to find a way. All of what you're saying is so important to document.
Yeah, well, what do you want me to say there?
It's just
What do you want me to speak to?
I know. That's what I'm trying to find. Like for this purpose of this exhibit, is it possible to give me sort of an overview of the water crisis in a way that we can take that piece for this exhibit and possibly use a lot of what you said in other ways? I'm just trying to get something that will be really strong and really impactful and really concise. Is that possible?
I mean, I guess
It's such an important story, and I know it's so
well,
complicated.
it is very complicated, and it's like it can't be like 30 seconds because you have to have this
No.
grounding.
No,
But I
know.
think that one of the things that I definitely wanted to say is like, since the Flint water crisis, there have been a lot of communities that tried to evoke Flint and their own issues. There have been politicians that, have propped up the story of Flint, for federal programs and federal policies, but none of those are Flint, because Flint was unique in the sense that the reason why the Flint water crisis happened is because we were under the emergency manager law, because we wouldn't have been on the Flint River for that long, because people who grew up in Flint like know what's in that river, and there would have been no way that there would have been water coming out of people's taps like untreated. Like there would have been some safety protocols if it was actually people in Flint that were making that decision. And we just became guinea pigs, and I would just say the consequences, is going to be across multiple generations. Because like one thing, like it wasn't just the lead, that happened here, even though the lead was terrible, and is having the repercussions of that is going to be long lasting for people's families. Like the trauma that is still there. Um, you know, like I have my own health issues as a result of the water crisis. Like I have seizures. Like my asthma has gotten, like I had like very mild asthma, and it's way worse that I'm on steroid inhalers now. So I have severe asthma. And I would just say you know, because of COVID, like we became like uniquely, impacted for folks who, became immunocompromised because of the water crisis. And like, I mean, it was just the trauma, because I remember talking to folks, like when you're like in your 30s, you're just basically like, hey, I'm gonna hang out, like, hey, let's go on vacation together. And I was talking about like, hey, like, does this anti-seizure medicine work? You know? So it's just like things that you would think that it'll be people in old folks' homes talking about. Like I'm talking about it with my friends, you know? Like so
It reminds me a little bit of like PTSD that people carry from living through a war zone or something.
yeah, I mean, there's people who will never drink unfiltered. Like, I don't think I would drink unfiltered water ever again. You know.
No matter what they say, because what they say can't be trusted, right?
Well, just knowing, I would say what happened in Flint and the work that I'm doing now, and just knowing, just the federal policies and just the inaccuracy. Like, I think that there's starting to be a change now, but there's a lot of things that they don't really test for that's like not just lead, and the fact that like 15 parts per billion is not like the golden ticket to prosperity. Like that's still lead. So there's no safe level for lead, but our policies is saying that there is a level, and the fact that folks, compliance to a law is not safety. Because when you think of like, is something safe, you think that there's a doctor saying like, yes, that's safe, you know? And like the lead and copper rule, or like these 15 parts per billion, or like an action level, that's basically like a treatment technique. It's like I'm putting together a cocktail and hopefully this is gonna work out. Like it's not like it's a doctor, because like none of the medical societies say that there's a safe level. Like there's not a number attached. They're all say like there's no safe level.
What is the official line on where the Flint water prices stand today, and what is your assessment of where the Flint water prices stands today?
I mean, I feel like is because like saying it's a crisis, thinks that like you assume it's temporary. It's not. I'm gonna have severe asthma for the rest of my life. People who have had multiple miscarriages, like that's just done. Like kids who have been like lead poisoned. I always say that, folks had dreams for their kids, and those dreams were derailed because of the water crisis. Um, and we have to get like these support systems, for people to succeed, and not just think that, just because you've been poisoned, like that isn't the totality of your existence. Is like, like, like I got asthma, I got that stuff, like, but I still travel like everywhere talking about the Flint experience. Like, I mean, just thinking about it as, like you just have this other thing that, it just makes that becomes part of your experience.
Your asthma and seizures, none of that existed before?
No, I mean, I had mild asthma, so I had childhood asthma, and then like went away like a lot of people like a child asthma. Was able to participate in sports and everything, and be pretty active. uh like before like the water crisis, like I was cycled about 10 miles a day, which is not, I mean, it's just okay. But like I know people who like, but it's still like just like to just get the heart rate up. um but now, like I can't climb a flight of stairs without being out of breath.
That sucks.
And then, like when you're dealing with trauma, like you just make traumatic decisions. So during like now hopefully we've made a turn out of COVID, hopefully. Like I don't want to know what the next COVID's going to be, but like I basically became a hermit because I was like, if I get it, I'm going to be on a ventilator. Like I was just like almost in fear of my life. And like if I didn't have like that severe, like if I wasn't just fearful, which I think that, before I was a little bit fearless. Like I did some stuff that was like I was just kind of fearless before the water crisis, but I just done some stuff, like as everybody does, but maybe at some point in life, but yeah, like I just think that it's I maybe it's somewhat tempered me, um, but I feel that folks are just making different type of decisions of um because of what's happening. I mean, I still use bottled water. Like I don't use the water because the other thing that came that emerged with the water crisis was like Legionella. And one of the things I never knew in my whole life before before living in Flint and fighting, like against the emergency manager law and all that stuff is like your filters, unless you have a whole house filter with a UV light, regular filters don't filter out bacteria. They can filter out like chlorine and like fluoride and heavy metals, but they don't kill bacteria. So like you could just be like, oh, I'm safe, and that's like one of the things where you just have this false sense of security, like, oh, I'm safe, But I think I probably had Legionella, like or something, because I remember going to the ER and um because I had a fever that just would not go away and I was feeling tired and I was just like just really feeling bad. And my discharge paper said I had an upper respiratory infection, but I had medication that they used to treat pneumonia. And I didn't even know that, but my brother, he's a nurse. Like he doesn't work in the state, but he's a nurse. And my mom, like is a administrator, hospital administrator. I like called her afterwards, and I was like, "Yeah, I got this med. Like I don't know any of this medicine. Like I always call my parents and everything, but yeah." So my brother was like, "Yeah, that's like the pneumonia cocktail. Like, do you have pneumonia?" And I was like, "Well, they gave me these breathing treatments and they did these X-rays and stuff, but it says that I have an upper respiratory infection." He was like, "That's a cold. Like that is not. You wouldn't get this stuff if you." I was like, "Oh no, like this is terrible." So
Flint has been hit with a lot of stuff through the decades. Uh, it's got quite a legacy. What do you think that the rest of the country can learn from the experience of this particular thing? Because I'm sure similar things are happening or have happened.
yeah, I mean, like Flint, and I don't like you. Like I know a lot of people like saying resilience, but to me, like resilience is always passive. And I mean, like Flint has always been active when faced with adversity, like from like the sit down strike to like the civil rights movement to like divestment of General Motors. Like we've always been resistant, and with the water crisis and emergency manager law, and it's like there's always been folks in Flint, like residents who've always like banded together to make to create spaces for people to like sit in their power and like really build community. And it's not like, and the crazy part is like as much as I'm happy like being like at the film, it's like there's so many like awesome people that nobody even know their name because they see something wrong and they just do the work. Like it doesn't have to be like it's a camera following you around or anything. It's just like people found like it may just be like that block, like or you know or like that neighborhood, but like there's like leaders everywhere in Flint, and that's why I love living here.
That's great. I mean, it's needed because for some reason it just seems like a lot has happened here. It's
Yeah,
kind of unique in that way.
yeah, yeah. It's been like a lot and a lot and a lot. It's been tons.
There's a lawsuit pending, right, or several?
Yeah, there's a bunch of lawsuits. So there is the civil lawsuits, um, like for damages, for folks around the water crisis. which, in my opinion, which this part also like disgusts me, is like, why do people have to so instead of working from like this precautionary, like you're assuming everybody's impacted and you're designing like a policy to support everyone who has been impacted, but we don't have that. It's basically like you have to prove how you were poisoned. And I'm like, that's so disrespectful. It's like mad disrespectful. Because before, like, residents first had to prove that there was a problem. So we had to prove that, like, we don't like paternalistic decision making and have the emergency manager coming in and like don't know our community but making all these decisions. And then we had to prove that there was something wrong with the water, like after being gaslighted, by officials. And we had to like work and get our own research to prove that. And then that was dismissed, by the state officials. And then we're like, okay, well, maybe we get a doctor. And then Dr. Monahan Tisha like presents her research. And then they just become really sexist with the response, like, oh, you don't know how to read data, which is just something like, like as a woman who has been like, it's all of those things where it's just like, it's that special layer of sexism that you just know that they would not say if you were not identified as a woman. So it was like that. And then finally, like really like finally, like we got the acknowledgement that there was something wrong with the water when it was the Detroit Free Press health reporter that was like, yeah, we want to look at the data that Dr. Monahan Tisha did. And the state was like, here are all the data. Now you can tell the truth, like basically being super dismissive. And then the health reporter was like, actually, she's right, so. And it really took like a lot of fight to even get us to move back to the Flint River, because before it was like, move away from the Flint River. It was like, okay, we're just gonna hand out these filters. Like basically like, we're gonna get you these filters. Like we're gonna be dancing off in the sunset, like once they built this pipeline, once the pipeline is finished. And so we had to do like a bunch of just like raising sand and stuff to get that acknowledgement. And then it was also a mayoral election year, and we elected a mayor, and she ran on this platform like, hey, like if I'm elected, I'm declaring a state of emergency. And that's what happened. Like that's how it became international news, because like we just got like some acknowledgement. But like once Mayor Karen Weaver was elected, like she was elected in November, December 15th, like she called a press conference declaring a state of emergency based on lead in the water. Like it was on the ticker at CNN by 4, and she's on Rachel Maddow by 8, And that's how it became like really international news. But then like,
How far into the crisis was this election and this mayor?
So the mayoral election was November 2015. And December 2015 is when she declared a state of emergency. And then January 2016 is when the state, Genesee County, the state of Michigan, and then the federal government, like, declared a state of emergency. And really, like, like Flint Rising actually began with a canvas to the undocumented Spanish-speaking community, because they didn't know it was a crisis. Like it was because nothing was translated any language other than English. Like we don't have any local like Spanish media. And we basically, because I have a friend who is part of that community, but he was like living in Boston, and one of his friends was like, hey, you need to come back, like this is crazy, this is like, I just left this family and they didn't know it was a crisis. They're still drinking the water. They were like formally using tap water. And so we were like, so he called me because he knows I'm an organizer. We've been friends for a long time.
How big of a Spanish-speaking community do you have here?
I would say a combination of documented, undocumented, probably about 10%. 10% of the population, so probably about 10,000 ish. But it's kind of sprinkled like along like a general area. And then we also have refugees who like have settled here, like fleeing war torn Syria and Yemen to come here and get poisoned. So we also have, Arabic speaking community. So we were so it really began like with a canvas to the Spanish speaking community, and we didn't get everywhere that we wanted to get. So we just kept on canvassing. And then like we were hearing like these stories basically on Facebook, like in these Facebook groups that had popped up, dealing with like what was happening at the Flint water, of just like all this crazy mess that was happening, all this wild mess that was happening because Governor Snyder, when he activated the National Guard, they require for folks to have a photo ID to get water at their distribution sites. And in Michigan, like you have to be a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident to get a state issued ID. Like we don't have municipal IDs in the state. And so, like, I mean, there's a couple of communities that now have them, but we don't have it in Flint. So what people were doing, were part of the community, was they were going to like, grocery stores, and ICE was at the grocery stores picking them up. So, and then like we had,
Oh my God, this is
the
amazing.
county sheriff like having folks on work release like delivering water, and they were serving warrants. And so we were just like, oh, hold up, like you're abusing folks who have already been traumatized. Like these are like institutions that are abusing people. And so like we really started with we want to have accurate information too. So we just started out like we're gonna have accurate information. We're gonna make sure that like we're not the government. Like we don't work for ICE. We want to have a space for people to get water and get the accurate information so they can make decisions for themselves and their family. And that's like really like how Flint Rising started. And then when we saw like all of the crazy shenanigans that was happening, we're like, okay, we're gonna need like some organized resistance to this, because this is crazy. Like we can't have this, of folks who are doing that, and folks who are work release, like delivering water, but they're not able to drink clean water while they're up in the jail. So they're drinking tap water. And it was just like totally insane. So, like we had like basically a lot of volunteers who were coming up and going door to door to inform people that don't drink the water. Like don't boil the water, because boiling is water is not going to get rid of lead. Like that's actually going to intensify the metals. It could release the other chemicals that we're not even talking about and make it more toxic for you by boiling it. With the total trihalomethanes or TTHMs, it's 6 times more deadly when it's released as steam, versus you drinking it. So you're taking a hot shower, and I love me some hot showers. And like, and trying to organize spaces for people to kind of finally tell their truths and be listened to. So because I know like it was people for like months like taking like the hair that fell out of their head and going to like the city council and like showing their hair and showing their water. And I know like one of the other things, which wasn't as bad and like life changing for me, that wasn't as bad life changing as the seizures and that stuff, is like I felt like I was getting like, I thought it was like acne. I thought it was really bad acne, and I don't get acne at all. Like my skin's pretty clear, but I was getting like, I think that now there were probably like chemical burns from like the chemicals that was in the water. So I stopped like, cuz I was like, love my little Neutrogena. Like my grapefruit Neutrogena. And so like I stopped like washing my face with cleanser and like using like micellar water, because like even just having like the water just like irritate my skin, where it just felt like it almost looked like an allergic reaction, but it was like itchy and like, yeah, it was like rashes. A lot of people had rashes.
How about now? don't drink tap water. I probably won't
Mm-hmm.
do it again in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But do you feel like it's better?
Well, actually, right now we're on a different water system than the what was the Detroit water system, which is now the Great Lakes Water Authority. Like we're on Kagani water now. So that water is harder. Like I've noticed a difference. Like we've been on that water, I think probably about 4 or 5 months, but I've noticed a difference. Like like my skin feels drier. I haven't had like the rashes and stuff like when we're on the Flint River water, but it does feel like the water definitely is harder because I've tested the water at least like for hardness. Um, but then the other thing is like, like I had moved. I mean, I'm still in Flint, but I don't live in the same spot where I was living in like during when the city of Flint was on the Flint River.
This is kind of an unbelievable story. Has anybody made a really comprehensive documentary about this that you know of?
I mean, there's been several documentaries. There's actually one coming out, I want to say next month, that I think
Really?
is going to be at the FIA. Yeah. There's been quite a few. So there's like, there was like a short one called like, I think it's called Hard to Swallow. Um, yeah, there's been like a few. Like, I know Frontline did like some like, but there's been a few, but some of them get it better than others. I really like the ones that reframe the water crisis, like
I'm
in
sure
the emergency
Frontline did
manager
a good
law.
job.
Yeah, yeah,
They're
they did.
they get to the heart of the matter, you know?
Mhm,
Because this story is almost hard to believe.
mhm.
It's that crazy.
Yeah, and there's been like a few books written about it now, like academic books. And Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha like has her autobiography and stuff, but it's wild, man.
Oh
It's like
my
totally wild.
Thank you for talking about this, and thank you.
I'm sorry for rambling.
No, 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 because it is important to understand the whole thing about the emergency manager and how that affected everything. And this is something that was already in place before. It was valuable to know that. Um, all these things don't just happen. It's not just one incident. It's many
Yeah.
incidents.
Yeah, and like looking at other communities, because we've been kind of like the de facto technical assistance organization for all these other communities that have had lead and water, since Flint. And looking at like what was the inciting incident, like in Pittsburgh, it was like they had contracted out their water system service and they just changed the corrosion control without telling anybody. They were just like, we're just going to do this on our own. But it wasn't like for that extended period of time, like Flint was. And they were able to kind of switch, like make some amendments super fast.